Well, hello, buddy. Really good to see you, or to be seen by some of you. I can't see you back there, but welcome. My name's Nate, if I haven't met you, and I'm thrilled that you're here. There's a lot of things you could be doing, but you are coming to church. I'm excited about a new series that we are kicking off. I'll tell you a little bit about the genesis of this series. I have a habit that I've tried to establish in my life where I spend regular time reading the scriptures, and I always spend it with a notebook because oftentimes when I read the Bible, I have questions, like lots and lots of questions. And some time ago, I was reading through the book of Luke, and I came to Luke chapter 9, and I just got stuck there. And I kept reading and rereading and asking questions, and I'm kind of a slow, methodical reader and thinker. And about a month later, I had finally felt like, okay, I finally am done reading Luke chapter 9, one chapter in the Bible. And I was just struck by the content. I was struck by the things that Jesus says, how challenged I was by this one chapter in the Bible. And we're going to take the next several weeks and just look at this one chapter in the Bible. And here's kind of the emphasis. Up until this point in Luke's narrative, Jesus has been demonstrating. He's been talking, he's been healing people, he's been engaging the spiritual realm, and he's had these 12 people, known as his 12 disciples, who have been following him, and they've just been impressed, and they kind of help out every now and then. But in Luke chapter 9, Jesus changes everything. He looks at his 12 disciples, and he now says to them, it's your turn. I want you to do what you've been watching me do, and I want you to say what you've been hearing me say. And Luke chapter 9 kind of walks through this struggle. So the interesting thing about this book, Luke, is it is written by a man who's a Greek. His name is Greek. And if you went to the beginning of the gospel, which would be the good news according to Luke, Luke is, he's some sort of physician, and he's a historian, and he is commissioned by a man named Theophilus, which means the man who loves God. Theophilus, who is a wealthy business person, we don't know a lot about him, but Theophilus hears about what happened in the first century AD with a man named Jesus, and Theophilus is fascinated, and so he employs Luke to travel all the way to what we call Israel today, and to interview everybody possible. And this happened within the first probably 30 years of Jesus' death. And so Luke is traveling and he is interviewing and he puts together his biography of the life of Jesus. And what's fascinating is Luke gets caught up in the story. He starts as an observer writing his book, but pretty soon you find him in the book of Acts traveling with the Apostle Paul. Luke just gets pulled into the story itself. And Luke is going to emphasize something. He's going to emphasize this thing called discipleship. And I know that's a little bit of a foreign term for many of us, but let me take a moment and let's explore the term discipleship. So in the first century, the way that you were taught theologically is there was a whole system of schooling, but eventually when all that ended, there were teachers who were known as rabbis. So rabbi means teacher. And rabbis were always looking for the people with the most potential that they could invite into their lives to be the word is mathetes, to be a disciple. And so rabbis are watching the educational system. In fact, they're involved. And they find certain individuals that they think this person has the potential to be a disciple, and the hope of being a disciple is that you eventually became a rabbi. And so they would invite people into their lives, and when a rabbi invited you to come be his disciple, you had a choice. You could either stay and be involved in whatever family business you'd been involved in, or you left everything, and your job was to then follow the rabbi, to follow the teacher. And this would be years of pursuit, where you would listen, and you would be taught, and your thinking, your framework would be altered. And in the end, after years of following your rabbi as a disciple, the hope would be that you would become a rabbi. And then you would choose disciples. So Jesus uses this motif of thinking as he is developing what he's doing on planet Earth. And he finds 12 young men, and he invites them to come be his disciples. And in Luke chapter 9, we have this moment where the book shifts from everything that Jesus did to Jesus now saying, my disciples are going to do the things that I did and say the things that I say. And the chapter is really challenging. If you were in charge of Jesus' marketing campaign, you might go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, you don't have to go that far, Jesus. You're going to turn some people off. Like that, Jesus is going to talk about picking up your cross daily and following him. He's going to invite people into self-denial and sacrifice and service. Jesus was very interested in developing disciples, not just believers, not just observers. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to look at this theme of discipleship in Luke chapter 9. Now, I promise we'll pick up speed in the future because today we're going to make it through 2 verses, right? But we won't go to Christmas in Luke chapter 9, I promise. So with this idea of discipleship, and for all of you, if you are currently a disciple of Jesus, I pray that as we explore this chapter, there's a challenge from Jesus where you take new steps, challenging steps. And if you are what we refer to as being spiritually unresolved, I pray that these words of Jesus will bring clarity over the next few weeks regarding what Jesus is asking of you if you choose to be his disciple. All right, Luke chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. When Jesus had called the 12, this was his 12 original disciples, when he called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. Okay, this is what Jesus had been doing. And now he looks at his 12 disciples, and they're probably a year and 10 months into following Jesus. And he says, okay, now I need you to go do this. And it's a fairly big task, right? Deal with spiritual darkness, demonic activity, cure diseases, and heal the sick. Anybody think, can't you give me a bigger challenge? Like, that's all you want me to do, Jesus? Proclaim your kingdom? And so they go. Now, as we look at this, I just want to bring out a few words. The first word is this: together. Together. This whole chapter, this whole portrait of discipleship that Luke shows us begins with Jesus calling the 12 together. I'm having an interesting fall. For I think about 24 years, I've had a son playing football. And this is my first, like, all my kids are grown and my last one graduated. And like, I keep driving by football fields and I'm like, oh, I remember that. I can see my future. I'm going to be the old dude at Dallas Stadium, sitting up by the press box, talking about the good old days, okay? Here's a couple of things that I like about football. It's just culturally, it's so odd that this happens. It's the huddle. Tell me when else you have 300-pound men standing in a tight circle holding hands. Just doesn't happen, right? So anybody who's not familiar with football, after every play, you're called into a huddle, and they usually circle up, and guys are like putting their hands on each other's backs or holding hands or like hands on the other guy's rear ends. Like this is like real football stuff. And you do this after every play. And what you do in the huddle is you hear the instructions coming in from the sideline. You hear what the play is going to be. You come together before every play and you try to figure out, okay, what is my assignment? What is the coach's wish for this next brief moment of execution? I guarantee you, if any of my boys, if I tried to like hold their hands, they'd be like, Dad. And I'm like, you hold hands with your football buddies all the time, right? But what is it? It's about coming together. This coming together. This is where discipleship starts. And there's two elements to this together word. The first is coming together with Jesus. Before Jesus sends anybody, he says, I need you to come to me. I need you to huddle up with me. I've heard this said, and I don't know who originally said it, but I think it's very true. If I don't come to Jesus, I'll eventually come apart. And I really believe that. So before I can go out and do the things that Jesus did and speak the words that Jesus said, I have to be in his presence. And I have to have him look in my eyes, and I have to have him speak to my soul. And I have to have him say, I have an assignment for you. You can do this. Your job is not just to exist here on planet Earth. Your job is not to accumulate and be comfortable. Your job is to carry out my mission. And I hear that when I come face to face with Jesus. I remember I grew up, I watched my parents have this radical transformation as they became followers of Jesus when I was a kid. And we all have childhood memories. Some of them are just cherished, and some are like, could have done without that. Here's something I'll never forget. I'd get up early in the morning. I was the oldest of 5 kids. And I see my dad. We lived in a house where we only had wood heat. And I see my dad wrapped in blankets, sitting by the wood stove, reading his Bible when he first became a follower of Jesus. It is just poignantly held in my memory. And that was my dad as a brand new follower of Jesus coming together with Jesus. He demonstrated something. He was a public school teacher, junior high at that. And he knew, before I go into that public school system with a bunch of wild-eyed middle schoolers, I have to be together with Jesus. Because my job is not just to teach them biology. My job is to represent Jesus to all those students. And there's something just so powerful about this. Before I go out and you can do the work of Jesus without coming to Jesus. But here's what ends up happening. You're on a humanitarian effort, and eventually you become exhausted. It's when I'm together with Jesus that I hear his words, that he speaks to me what I need to hear, that he reminds me who I am. That's the core of discipleship. It is not a program that you follow. It is not a series of books that you read. All those things are important, but that is not discipleship. Discipleship is learning how to be together with Jesus, to follow the rabbi, to be transformed by his way of thinking and speaking. There's a second element to this word together, and that would be community. Jesus doesn't just call the 12 individually, one at a time, to come to him. He says, I want all 12 of you in here. So there's 13 people in this original huddle. And Jesus says, I want you to go and I want you to do the things that I did. Now, interesting, Luke doesn't capture this, but there's about 6 different times when Jesus sends out either his 12 or a larger group of 70 plus. And when he does it, all the times except for here, it says he sends them out 2 by 2. 2 by 2. He always wants them to go in a community. And this element of together, this thought that we're interdependent and we need one another, this can be really difficult for those of us who are raised in the United States of America and maybe in this region of the country near Montana. We tend to be fairly autonomous. Like your grandpa moved here and your grandma moved here 5 generations ago because they didn't need nobody, right? Like, we're gonna move to the plains of Montana and exist in a sod hut. That's all we need. And so we have kind of this sense of autonomy and independence running through us. But discipleship, first it's coming together with Jesus, then it's coming together with other people. Other people who are dysfunctional like you are and irritating at times. We have a core value. You'll notice it if you're watching online, it'll be all over our webpage. It's out on the wall out here. We grow better together. Why? Because this is important. If you came to me and said, hey, I want to become a follower of Jesus, what do I do? Here's what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't hand you a Bible and say, hey, read this. and report back to me in 6 months. That would not be a recipe for discipleship or growth. If you're going through a crisis, if you're involved in grief share because you lost somebody you love, I wouldn't say, hey, here, read this book on grief and just deal with it by yourself, you'll be fine. If you're dealing with addiction, whether it's substance abuse, anything else, I wouldn't say, hey, just go find a way to be private and deal with your addiction. Everything that we do around here, here's what we realize. We need people, we need community. Discipleship is about community. So if you came to me and said, hey, I just want to follow Jesus, I would hand you a Bible, and then I would look at my friend Cole, and I would say, Cole, I need you to read the Bible with this person and help them grow as a disciple. Because I promise you, if you just tried to grow by yourself, you would have very limited development. If you found a friend who had been down the road and you grew with them, your growth would be exponentially increased. Why? Because we need each other. Jesus said you grow in community. Everything he does is with groups of people. Because I need somebody who can challenge me and encourage me. I need someone who can correct me. I need somebody who can look in my eyes and remind me of who I actually am. Together. Discipleship begins, first of all, coming together with Jesus, and secondly, living together with other people together. The second word is this word gave. So in the huddle, Jesus distributes something. He brings the 12 with him, and what does he do? He gave them two things, power and authority. Power and authority to drive out diseases, drive out demons and cure diseases, healing the sick. And this is why it's absolutely essential to begin your discipleship not with your own initiative and your own efforts, but you come to Jesus, because what Jesus just asked his disciples to do is insane, isn't it? None of them are doctors. None of them are exorcists. They've just been watching Jesus do all these things. And Jesus says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out there. I'm going to preach the kingdom. I want you to deal with demonic realities in people's lives. And I want you to deal with sickness, human suffering. You think, well, I don't know how to do that. If that's your assignment for Monday morning, anybody feel slightly inadequate? Like, could we lower the bar a little bit, Jesus? Could you say, I want you to go and I want you to be nice to people. Okay, I can do that. That's not what Jesus asked his followers to do. He asked his followers to confront the forces that stand in opposition to God and defeat them. And he asked his followers to deal with human suffering and sickness. And the only way I know how to do anything like that is to be the recipient of power and authority. Because I do not have power and authority to deal with those things. I'm not big enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not able enough. But in the huddle is where Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And here's how I'm going to equip you to do it. I'm going to give you power and authority to look at hatred in the eyes and overcome it with love. I'm going to give you power and authority to see people who are suffering, and rather than walk away and be dismayed or just feel empathetic, I'm going to give you the power and authority to enter into that world and to begin to actually make a difference. Power and authority. I was reading a book recently, and it was just had one small chapter. It wasn't the emphasis of the book. But it was about the White House and this era, which just happened once, as far as I know, where there were children in the White House. It was under the presidency of John F. Kennedy. And it was the perspective of some of the White House staff. So imagine the White House, right? There's decorum, there's security, there's just deference, there's respect. And the White House staff just didn't know what to do when you had little kids running around, like hiding under the Resolute desk and playing hide and seek and bursting into meetings. Like, what do you do about that? Well, the author said something like this. it was interesting for them to watch because there was specifically a little boy who was so comfortable with who he was, meaning he was the son of the president, that he felt like he owned the White House. He had a sense of authority. He had a sense of, I'm empowered, I'm meant to be here. Where everybody else who walks into that office, there's deference, there's humility, there's, you got to act proper, but you have a little boy who's just running around because this is my dad. I think what Jesus wants from his disciples is this sense of security and identity that's so profound that I'm not afraid. That my sense of inadequacy and fear of failure just evaporates. And then I'm running through life, coming to the huddle. Jesus is giving me the cues for the day, saying, here's the play. Today, I want you to go confront darkness. Today, I want you to confront brokenness. I want you to be a healing agent. And I'm like, okay, if you give me power and authority, and Jesus says, I do. Here's everything you need. You operate in my name. You don't operate in your own name. A disciple doesn't go out there and operate in the name of a church or operate in the name of their experience. You operate in the name of Jesus because he's given me power. He's given me authority. A little while back, I had the privilege of going down to visit our oldest son. He's just really special circumstance. I can't talk about what he does for a living, but where he works, he is all secured, like everything's secured, right? And there's just gates and razor wire everywhere, but he has this ID, and wherever he had the ID, doors open, special clearance, and he got to take his old man with him. I got to see some things that I'm not qualified to see, but because this kid says, hey, here you go, people like, oh, and they open the door for him. There's clearance. You can be deputized. You can be confident. Here's what happened. Rabbi Jesus, when you surrendered your life to him, he deputizes you. He says, you now have authority. You have clearance. You have power. You have the things that you could never produce because I've won this and now I hand it to you. Jesus does a really interesting thing with these same disciples sometime down the road. They're at a place called Caesarea Philippi. And Jesus says, here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. And whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. Whatever you bind on earth, bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And man, that is powerful. Because if you get keys, right? If you get keys, you have access. If I gave you, I don't have my keys, but if I gave you my keys, you can get into any door in this building. You can get in my home. You can get in my cars. It means I trust you. I trust you. And here's what Jesus does to his disciples. He says, I trust you. I give you power and authority. Here's the keys. The keys to the kingdom. So the second word is gave. When I come to the huddle, discipleship means I look at Jesus and he gives me what I don't have. And I operate in his authority. Here's the third thought. When Jesus sends them out, he sends them out to have this balanced reality of a message and a mission. A message and a mission. And here's why I want to talk about this. So I want you to go and I want you to preach the kingdom of God. Okay, so there's your message. I want you to go and announce. Well, what is that message? Well, even during the summer when we're looking at the parables, big theme of most of the parables is the kingdom of God. It's this idea that God has returned to planet Earth and Jesus is a king and he's going to win a kingdom, win a battle. It doesn't have anything to do with politics or armies. It has to do with victory over sin. And now the kingdom is this: you can have a relationship with your creator, your past can be dealt with, and this king has a new set of ethics and values. In fact, he's got a very fascinating foreign policy where he says, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. And it's this new kingdom. So Jesus is constantly talking about it. He said, I didn't come to overthrow the Roman Empire. I came to establish a kingdom in the midst of earthly empires, in the midst of governments. But this kingdom is a kingdom where people bow first and foremost to me, and the king is empowering them, and the king is working through them. So Jesus says, when you go, I need you to make sure you have a message. I need you to announce the kingdom. Now, in our culture, if you came up to your coworker and said, hey, I've got some kingdom news for you, they would look at you like, what are you talking about, right? So I think we have to think through, what does this kingdom mean? I think the kingdom message in today's world would be this: there is someone who is bigger than your pain. There is someone to worship who is consistent and caring and loving. There's a way to deal with the past, the kingdom message. So here's the challenge. Sometimes the church, we get into imbalance. Remember I said it's a message and a mission. Jesus says, go and preach and go and do. And we can be all about preaching and not doing. And that ends up feeling really hollow to people. Or you could be all about doing and have no message. And that impoverishes the message of Jesus. So Jesus says, as you go into these little cities, I want you to say something. It's not elaborate. It's about a new king who's in town. And I want you to do something. And this is the one where he goes back to, I want you to address the demonic realm, and I want you to deal with sickness and sick people. Let's talk about the mission for a moment, because the church has a mission. A disciple has a mission to preach the message of the kingdom and to do the work of the kingdom, the mission. So sickness, human sickness is a reality. Like, we face it all the time, correct? It's out there. And Jesus says to his disciples, I want you to go and move towards it rather than away. In the ancient world, you moved away from sick people because they had no idea how does sickness get passed. And so you ostracized. If somebody had a skin condition, you pushed them out of the community, right? If somebody had sickness, you didn't know where it came from, you pushed them out of the community. And Jesus is always saying to his disciples, I want you to go towards sickness. I want you to engage with people. I want you to pray prayers over people who are sick. I want you to show compassion and empathy. We have so many people in a part of this church in different ways. You're part of the medical community. Your nurse, your doctor, your administrator. I love this. You're involved in the mission of Jesus. And what's even better is, as a disciple of Jesus, you're not just acting as a professional carrying out what you learned, but I've seen you. You come to a bedside and you have empathy and love. And sometimes you sneak in a prayer. You're going to treat them with everything you know how to treat them, but you're also going to treat them with respect and love. Mission. Now, how about this demonic thing, right? Anybody a little bit confused? Like, out of all the things that Jesus could have said, why does he say, I need you to go address demons? Okay, address demons. So I don't want to talk about this often at our church, because here's I don't want to give the devil more press. Like, he gets plenty. But we need to talk about this, because Jesus didn't say, I want you to go preach the message and be really nice to your neighbor. He didn't say, I want you to go preach the message. And he said, I want you to go preach the message and deal with the demonic realm. I want you to cast them out. So for us to think through this, because this is pretty foreign to our way of thinking, I want to just maybe illustrate this for a moment. Why is this such a big deal to Jesus? And it's part of what Jesus just does regularly. Read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He's just dealing with demons. So the Bible says something like this: that God is triune, and he makes human beings triune. I mean, three parts. So with God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and then he makes human beings in his image, which is probably the thing that's most distinct from the rest of the animal kingdom, is that this sense of Trinity, okay? So your body, in the Greek, this is known as your sarx, okay? And then a soul. This is your psyche. We call it like your mind, your will, your emotions. And then the third part is the spirit part. This is pneuma in the Greek. And so there's some sort of interrelation, but we're not exactly sure. No, Jesus says, I want you to do what? I want you to help people who are sick, and I want you to drive out demons. So here's where this gets really interesting. remember, New Testament's written 2,000 years ago, and there are certain things where we read, and you're like, I'm not sure that was a demon. So illustrations would be, there are people with mental illnesses. That's how we would call it. The demoniac of the Gerasenes actually is recorded in the book of Luke. And this guy's like out there. He like is naked and lives in the cemetery and terrifies a village and runs around screaming. And he comes screaming, naked, screaming, crazy guy up to Jesus. What would we call that? Mental illness. Like naked, crazy guy, lives in the cemetery. That's mental illness. And what does Jesus do with him? He casts out a legion of demons. And he casts the demons into the pigs. And the pigs run into the water and drown. And then the next picture we have this guy is he's sitting clothed and in his right mind, listening to Jesus. So, okay, why do we call that mental illness? And Jesus says, well, that was actually demonic. There'll be times, there's a man who brings his son, and his son is struggling. And when we read the description, it sounds like significant seizures and like a really, really dangerous form of epilepsy. It says that the boy would be thrown into fits, uncontrollable fits, and one time would even like roll into the fire. And we read that and we go, oh, that sounds like epilepsy. Like we're still dealing with that. But how do you treat epilepsy in the year 2023? We treat this, right? Jesus cast a demon out and the boy's okay. So we read this and we're like, okay, what do we do about this demon stuff? Because if you go up to your neighbor who has a headache and go, I'm going to cast that demon out of your head, they're going to be like, you know, like, please don't. Here's what I think is really different. We've had 2,000 years to develop things like microscopes. If 2,000 years ago, you would have talked about chemical levels in the brain, if Jesus would have said, hey, let me tell you about the chemical imbalances in this person's brain, people would be like, what's a chemical? What's inside your brain? Like, there's just no knowledge, right? All this is developed. Here's what I think is challenging for us to understand. I think the Bible actually paints a picture like this. These three things are much more interrelated than we would think. So even in our world, if you have a physical problem, who do you go to? A physician, okay? And then we have specialties. If your physical foot problem is with your foot, you go to a podiatrist, right? If you have a soulish problem, who do you go to? A therapist, psychiatrist, right? Somebody who helps you work through what that really mysterious part of me that can accumulate trauma and pain. And if you have a spiritual problem, who do you go to? A pastor, somebody you respect, something like that, right? And then have you noticed these people don't get along? Fascinating, because they all have a different perspective on what makes a human being. Have you ever told your medical doctor that you went to a chiropractor? They're like, oh. They're not real doctor, right? And you tell your chiropractor that you're going to an allergist, and your chiropractor's like, oh my gosh, if I just snap your back, your allergies would be gone. And like, I'm like, well, who's right? Right? Who's right? Because we have this very distinct way of thinking about this. Here's what I think Jesus emphasized for disciples dealing with the demonic. Because it's way more intricate and interrelated than we would ever anticipate. So I'll ask you a question. If you are clinically depressed, is that a physical issue? Could be, right? Like there are real chemicals that can get out of whack in your body, and medication could help. But is depression, clinical depression, is it a soulish issue? Probably, right? There's something, there's a hurt, there's some trauma that needs to be resolved. Is it a spiritual issue? Yeah. Okay, let's change it. You're facing chronic pain, decades, chronic pain. Like that pain where you don't sleep well, that pain where you can't move without discomfort. Is that a physical issue? Oh yeah. is it also, you give it enough time, become a soulish issue? Absolutely. And could it be a spiritual issue? Can you start to wonder, does God even care about me? Does he know about my suffering? And so rather than Jesus say, hey, I just want you to go heal people and deal with demons, I think that Jesus is saying in words that were culturally appropriate for 2,000 years ago, Jesus is saying, I want you, see, I firmly believe this, there is a demonic element to most human pain and suffering. It may not be the first thing that happens, but if there is someone out there who wants to crush you and separate you from the God that loves you, what's he gonna do? He's gonna capitalize on physical pain or emotional pain, and he's gonna bring in doubt and torturous thoughts and self-destructive tendencies. Where does addiction fit in? Is addiction a physical thing? Yeah, you become chemically addicted to things. But is it just that? Have you ever talked to an addict and go I've got an idea for you. You should stop. Just stop. Well, the problem is they can't stop, right? Is it a soulish thing? Oh yeah. There's always a story behind addiction. There's something that you're trying to numb, something you're trying to escape. Is it a spiritual addiction or a problem? Absolutely. Man, the enemy of this world is gonna cling on and try to enhance that addiction in any way they possibly can and bring shame and isolation. And Jesus says this, I want you to go into the world and I want you to address physical realities and I want you to address spiritual realities. And I want you to take them head on. And I want you to have power and authority to drive out demons and to deal with human sickness, to be engaged with a broken world surrounds us. What does it mean to be a disciple? Together. Together with Jesus, together with people. Gave. He gives us power and authority to accomplish some immense mission. And to balance this idea of I've got a message and I've got a mission, I am engaged in the story of humanity, bringing life and love wherever possible.